Well, guys, it's hard to believe this is the last session in this first run of 33, A Man and His Design. We have covered a ton of ground.
We've covered a lot of ground, but the amazing part is that we're not done yet. We still have one more session left to really begin to look at the seasons. I know, Terrence, you're up. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, me too. You know, the important thing we're going to learn today is not just to identify the seasons of a man's life, but how we can prepare for them. You know, the key is, how do we transition from season to season? Because the way we transition, if we transition well, that sets us up for success in the next season of life.
That's great. I can't wait to hear it.
I'm excited about it.
Well, guys, we've spent the last two sessions talking about the different faces of manhood. We discussed the king, the warrior, the lover, and the friend. It's the idea that your manhood can't be just one-dimensional. It needs to be able to express itself appropriately given different situations. Now, men who are on the path of authentic manhood are not only aware of the different situations in their life, they're also aware of the different seasons of life. You can't just run the same play over and over again. What worked in your 20s won't necessarily work in your 40s and 50s. If you were about to set out on a journey into unknown territory, it wouldn't be too smart to begin without a map of some kind. That would be foolish. It could prove to be costly and even dangerous. You'd want to know what opportunities and threats are ahead. You'd want to know where others failed so you could avoid the same mistakes. And you'd want to know which paths led to success so you could chart your course and follow in their steps. So, in this final session of this leg in our journey, we're going to give you just such a map that will help you navigate the different seasons of your life. Living out authentic manhood in life hinges in large part on our ability to know what season of life we're in, what needs to be prioritized in that season, and what opportunities and threats that season presents. Life is more than just living from day to day. It's made up of back to back to back seasons of life. We need to fully understand the importance of recognizing specific life stages. So we want to give you 4 key ideas that help us smoothly transition through these seasons. First is the idea of reverse engineering. This term originally became popular through military and commercial espionage. A business or an army wanted to match the innovative features of one of its competitors. So what did they do? Well, they acquired or they captured their competitor's product. And then they broke it down into its parts to figure out how they could reproduce it themselves. It's basically the concept of beginning with the end in mind. As men, we must figure out where we want to go, where we want to end up in life, and then determine the steps to get there. One thing that can help us along the way is examining the lives of godly men who have gone before us. How did they get where they are? It didn't just happen for them one day. So what we do is we apply our own reverse engineering. We examine the product of their lives and break it down into its parts. And we figure out how we can make some of the same strategic moves that they made.
Well, you know, for 27 years, I served on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. I traveled and spoke and represented the organization. And, you know, about 7, 8 years or so ago, I began to sense that God wanted me to shepherd and to pastor. And this right here, obviously, this is my bride, the joy of my life. And we've been married 40 years, and she's a sweetheart. These are our kids, Brian and Heather and Brendan and Holly. One of the things we did with our boys when they were 13 years old is that we brought other men into their lives because I realized that they needed more than what I could give them. They had to write out their goals for the year, had to write out what they were believing God to do in their lives, what they wanted to see accomplished. Because it's during that season in your life where what's been invested in you will sprout. It's pretty remarkable that both of our sons are preaching now, and all of our kids love Jesus, and God does things in spite of us. I think it's terribly important during the summer years of your life that you learn brokenness and you learn lessons in confession of failure. You begin to live by the intangibles of life. If you're not careful, you'll forget the long-range view. That what we do every single day is exponential. And you don't define yourself one-dimensionally. That's a huge mistake. Huge mistake. We paint ourselves in the corner and we start defining ourselves based on our jobs or how many zeros I have in my paycheck or all these other external things. While I'm working, I glance at them and think about what's really important in life. Every other season, you gotta be living out the intangibles, because you're developing an account morally, your character, with your relationship, with your choices, that you're gonna have to start withdrawing. And I think it's in the fall, but particularly the winter, but in the fall you start withdrawing from that account. One of my prized possessions here, Milton was the son of a slave, my great-grandfather, Peter. He had this in the family Bible, and he wrote this in his own hand, and his father, Peter, was illiterate as a slave. But I look at this sometimes and I read those names and I think of the prices that they've paid and the integrity of their lives. I think the winter season of a man's life is called the patriarch season, and that's the Bible celebrates that time. And patriarchs, and this ought to be a time in our lives when we prepare a generation for a time that we cannot see. One of the things that I've learned as I've gone through these seasons in my life, number one, you need to be a learner, to journal and learn. And then number two, this sounds like a negative word, but it's a powerful word. You need to be a repenter. As you go through each one of these phases in your life, you celebrate what God has done, the experiences that you have, and you learn from them so that you become better. And what ends up happening as you go from, say, springtime to summer to fall, and now you're facing the winter of your life, well, you've accumulated so much experience, and there's so much wealth of knowledge you can give.
And that leads us to the second key idea. It's the power of mentorship. Each of us needs to have men in our lives who have already experienced the season of life that we're in right now. So if you're in your 20s, you would be wise to have a man in his 30s or 40s who can advise you as you develop vocational skills and start a family. If you're in your 40s or 50s, you would be wise to have men in their 60s and 70s helping you prepare for the transition into those years. The third key idea is that of transition. According to the experts, men undergo very predictable transitions between certain stages of life. And in these transitions, men often feel restless. They feel unsettled and insecure. They experience a very real need to reevaluate themselves or reinvent themselves if they're going to feel a sense of worth in the next season of life. Guys, since we know these transition periods are coming, we would be wise to plan for them. So in this session, we're going to point out the major transitions to you and offer advice on how you can manage them well. We also need to be aware that those around us will also undergo transitions. The needs of our spouse and our children will change with each season, and we need to be in tune with those needs. Are you still treating your teenage children like little kids? Are you helping your wife prepare for the empty nest years that are ahead? Wise is the man who is aware of the transitions his family is going through. The final key idea is a principle that comes from the Bible. It's called the laws of the harvest. The laws of the harvest. These laws are a metaphor that's taken from the world of agriculture. The first law is we reap what we sow. The second is we reap more than we sow. And the third is we reap in a different season than we sow. It's crucial for us to understand that the decisions we make today matter, not just for today. They also shape our future seasons. The harvest in the future seasons of our life is in a large way determined by the investments we make in the present. What we're sowing today will come back to us, and oftentimes in greater measure. In this session, we're going to map out the 4 seasons of life. And as we work through this map, it's important to know that this is a big picture process. Some of the issues that we'll discuss for each stage are generalizations. Every man's life experiences are unique, so we won't be creating an exact checklist for you to follow. Now, with these key principles in mind, let's get started. Let's lay out a map to help us navigate through the seasons of a man's life. Think of the first season of a man's life as spring. And it's all about him coming to terms with his identity. This is the childhood and adolescence stage. It should end somewhere between the ages of 18 and 22. It's in this season that a boy becomes a man, at least physically speaking. Whether he thinks or acts manly will depend on a number of factors. The key to this stage is transitioning into adulthood well. This is when he begins to make a break with the home he grew up in. He takes a job, or he goes to college, or he joins the military, or he assumes some new responsibility. But during this time of transition in his life, and this is critical, he must grow up. This is a season when life finally stares a man in the face, and he can no longer just live under the wing of his mom and his dad. To succeed, he must transition into manhood. The main questions he must begin to answer in this stage of life are, who am I? And who am I not? Will he be satisfied with being big or little? Musical or mechanical? Athletic or academic? Will he be satisfied with being introverted or extroverted? Handsome or plain? He must wrestle with his identity, and coming to terms with both his talents and his limitations is essential. Accepting how God has made him will help set him up to succeed in the next stage of life. Now, again, think of this season as spring, when all of those things are beginning to emerge, and he's identifying who he is and who he is not. The next season of life is summer, a man's 20s and 30s. The 20s should be the first adult stage of a man's life. The first part of this summer season is about learning, and with it comes some very real threats or dangers. For a lot of guys in their 20s, there's the danger that they'll get lost in an extended period of adolescence and pursue boyish behaviors indefinitely. In effect, to never grow up. But we learned in previous sessions that extended adolescence is not an option for authentic manhood. Another significant danger for a man during his 20s, and this applies to every stage really, but especially here, is how he handles his sexual energy. He must decide, is this sexual energy going to dominate me, or am I going to use it in a principled manner? Is passion going to be something I use, or does it use me? Just about every man will agree this. Sexual intensity is always part of a man's life. I mean, ask some of the older guys, okay? Whether you're 20 or 80, lust is a factor. The question is this: is sexual energy going to be our friend or our master? The Apostle Paul makes it pretty clear for us in 1 Thessalonians. Listen to what he says, chapter 4. He says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God." Now, does that mean that you can't be sexual? Not at all. This is not a disclaimer on sexual energy. It's a disclaimer on sexual immorality. There's a difference. God created sex, and it should be enjoyed. And it should be one of the great blessings of marriage. But it has to be handled in a principled manner. Otherwise, it becomes your master, and you become its slave. If that happens, it will do great harm to a man, and he'll find himself dealing with the damage later. Those are two very real dangers that must not be ignored. But this season also brings with it a major opportunity. And that's the opportunity to learn. To take your first professional steps, to try your first job, to make your first professional mistakes and to learn from them. You should prioritize learning and development over all other variables, such as money or city of choice. This is a time to take risks and to seize opportunities. Some of the key questions for your 20s include, what do I want out of life? Where will I distinguish myself professionally? How am I different from my parents? What do I really believe? What skills do I still need to develop? Author Gordon MacDonald says that the mother of all questions for your 20s is this: around what person or conviction will I organize my life? MacDonald says this, he says, one must identify an organizing principle that will bring the pieces of life into order. For those of us who are pursuing authentic manhood, we know that principle is really a person. It's Jesus Christ, His saving power, His call, and His teachings. The second part of this summer season is in your 30s. And this is typically when a man begins to hone in on a vocation and start a family. While your 20s should be a season of learning, your 30s is where you really begin to see growth in those areas. This is the time to perfect your skill set, to start logging hours in your craft, whether it's plumbing, building, investing, consulting, or whatever. The 30s are about growth. You want to begin to distinguish yourself as an expert in something. Where are you going to add value in society? It's also typically in his 30s that a man begins a family. Having a wife and young children is a delight and a privilege for a man. But the increased responsibilities of a career and a family also bring unique challenges. It's in this stage of life that a man will be tempted to develop some bad habits, and they're hard to break. With the additional demands at work, well, he can quickly become a workaholic. With the increased relational demands of a wife and young kids at home, well, he can quickly become disconnected from God in character-shaping relationships with other men. And it can feel like a never-ending struggle just to keep his head above water. A key word to remember for this stage of life is margin. Working hard is a good thing. So is spending time with your family. So is developing your relationship with God, and so is cultivating authentic friendships with other men. Now, can you feel the tension in that? In the middle of all those good pursuits, you must make it your goal to create margin so you can move gracefully in and out of those important areas. Without margin, do you know what's compromised? Relationships. You may have a lot of acquaintances, but no soul-level connections. And your family is just getting the leftovers. Satisfying authentic relationships requires time and vulnerability. Without margin, it's just not going to happen. As you navigate through this stage, it's important to remember that it won't last forever. The long nights with babies crying will eventually pass. Toddlers will grow up. Life will become more manageable. I run into young fathers in their 30s, and sometimes I can just see the weariness in their face. And I want to remind them to embrace this unique time when their kids are young, because it won't last forever, and they'll have several decades on the back end of life when the kids are out of the house. There are two key questions for your 30s. How do I prioritize the demands made on my life? And have I allowed enough time for a spiritual life and authentic relationships outside of my family? The next season requires another transition. The first transition was from adolescence to manhood, which should take place somewhere between 18 and 22. This next important transition occurs between the ages of 40 and 45. This is where a man transitions out of the early adulthood of his 20s and 30s into the fall season of life. This is the season of influence from age 40 to age 60. There can be a great harvest in this season from the seeds a man has sown and cultivated in the spring and summer of his life. During this transition, a man typically evaluates his successes and his failures from the last 20 years. Has he achieved everything he wanted? Does he have dreams that remain unfulfilled? Can his mistakes be redeemed? Are his accomplishments really that fulfilling? If he doesn't come to terms with all these things, then the great harvest of his influence will suffer.
In the early years, the spring season of my life, as a child, I was real active in sports, good in school. I made straight A's and had a lot of friends around the neighborhood. I grew up in a home where I was taught if I was responsible and did the right things that my life would be good. And met my first wife in college, and we were married, and I ended up with a really good job, a career in engineering, and pursued that till my early 30s. And I had money, I had a great job, I had a wonderful wife, I even had a daughter, but I knew that I didn't know the truth. And I'd seen a few people that I kind of looked toward and thought they know something that I don't know. As I got into the summer season of my life, I knew there was something wrong. I knew something needed to change. I knew my wife wasn't happy. I didn't know how to be a father. Although I was doing great, as most people would think as a father, I knew that I couldn't tell my daughter the truth. I didn't understand life, and I began searching at that time. A lot of issues began to raise up in my life. I went through a divorce, and when I went through my divorce, I received several DWIs and was facing jail time or prison time if I didn't quit drinking. And my career continued to progress. I did outstanding at my job, was promoted several times. And about 2 years after my divorce, I can remember in a bar at 3 in the morning, calling out to God. It was the first night I'd drank in over 2 years. And I said, God, if you're really there, I give you my life. It was about 2 hours later that I ended up driving my car. And it was the first night I said I had drank. I was arrested for my 4th DUI and ended up being sentenced to prison. During that last year waiting to go to prison, I fell into a major drug addiction. During that time, I lost everything that I had. I lost my home, my life savings. Because of the drugs, I was court ordered not to have any contact with my daughter without direct supervision. And then it was at prison where a lot of things began to change for the good. And I was put in a cell with a guy whose nickname in prison was Preacher Man. He began to pray with me. He gave me a Bible and started asking me to read it. And I can remember that he told me that faith comes by hearing the Word of God. And that he told me just read the Bible. Within 2 months, God completely changed my life. He became very real to me. I now knew God deeply. And my relationship began immediately being restored with my daughter, with my family, with my parents. And when I left prison 10 months later, the first thing that I got to do was see my daughter again. But that was kind of the summer and into the fall of my life. I can remember leaving prison and my heart was back at the prison. I knew so many men there needed to hear the message of hope. At the root of it was not knowing God personally, and so many men don't know that message. The one thing I'd like to share with men is no matter what their spring life and summer of their life was like, that the fall and winter toward the end of their life can be magnificent with God. With Him, it's been unbelievable. I've spent 10 to 12 years following Him now. and it's been the best time of my life.
Men who don't transition well into middle adulthood usually fall to the major danger of this season, and it's a midlife crisis. He feels restless, maybe because of unfulfilled dreams or regrets he believes can't be resolved. It typically plays itself out with guys turning to escapes to numb the pain or making futile attempts to relive their youthful years. They often develop a preoccupation with recreational gadgets or alcohol, gambling, internet pornography, or possibly even an extramarital affair. The great opportunity in this season of life can be summed up in one word: influence. Influence. It's in this season that a man can be more powerful and productive than he has ever been before. It is in this season that he's on center stage. David Levinson calls men between the ages of 45 to 60 the dominant generation. He says that the guys in this season create and implement the governing ideas in every sector of society, whether it's politics, business, religion, art, or science. If you're in this stage, then you have a certain level of influence. You are positioned to make a bigger impact for God and His kingdom right now, more than at any other season of your life so far. You have the incredible opportunity to accept the responsibility of your influence, to be creative, and to use your influence to lead courageously. Your 60s and beyond is generally considered to be the winter season of life. This is also known as the sage season. And this is the time when a man should be marked by wisdom, experience, and respect. That's what sage implies. Proverbs 20:29 says this. It says, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair." Well, there's more to that than just the color of his hair, okay? His composure, his maturity, and his insight should distinguish him. In this season of life, you are not perceived by younger men as a competitor as much as you're perceived as a champion who is qualified to coach them toward their successes in life. Many men in this season possess the confidence necessary to share openly with younger men about their failures as well as their successes. The greatest danger of this season is for a man to buy the lie that he can no longer contribute. He's got to realize that although he may be retiring from his career, he is not being released from his calling to invest in other men. He must realize he's not being put out to pasture and that he can make his greatest contributions at this stage in life. This is the ultimate season for creating and cultivating by blessing others. In fact, the major opportunity during this season of life is to take advantage of your flexibility. Oftentimes, this is when a man has more freedom than he's ever had before and can possibly direct his creative energy where he pleases. He can pour into younger generations. He can use his wisdom to create and guide projects that can impact a community or make a difference in the world. He has the flexibility to serve and to mentor others, to multiply his influence. Well, guys, as you look at this map, where are you right now? Whether you're in your 20s, your 40s, or your 80s, there are unique threats and unique opportunities that are present in each season of life. The main point is that you should live intentionally, not just wandering through life and reacting to it, but seeing what's ahead so that you can prepare for the bumps and the transitions and not miss the opportunities. Regardless of the season of life you're in, as men, we are all called to create and cultivate, not for a particular season, but for our entire life. We're called to follow the example of Jesus. We are created to live a life of truth, passion, and purpose. As men on a journey towards authentic manhood, we now know how to do that. Reject passivity, accept responsibility, lead courageously, and invest eternally.
Time out from the game. In other words, stop playing. Cause playing around and playing to win's not the same thing. You can keep playing that game, that's until the weather change. Nobody likes to lose, but they live like they're the same. Spinning wheels like treadmills, going nowhere fast. No plan to be a man, just letting the time pass. Passive, taking whatever's handed to you. Like forbidden fruit after God gave commandments to you. They say opposites attract like shorts in the winter. Never satisfied, longing for June and December. The spring comes in and then it leaves just the same. Those I meet in autumn look at the summer with shame. They see the seasons change but never can maintain. Trying to reverse the time instead of adjusting aim. Reverse engineer it, try to ride before you steer it. And learn to live with the end in mind, like a period. Find someone who's been there, a mentor who's did it. So you can transition well into what he's intended. Next, what we see is the law of the harvest. Reap, sow, and whatever you do now will affect you till you've departed. Now I heard the world's a stage, a beautiful landscape. A stage in stages, and man's race to man's fate is seen in seasons, like sage is. And when I saw this landscape, it looked like leaves falling from trees, until my eyes were opened by him to everything I should see. Step back from day to day to see from year to year. Let far-sighted blurs begin to become clear. That's when I see seasons. Seasons. Don't waste your season. Learn to live with the end in mind. Don't waste your season. Learn to be one who'll find one who'll teach. Don't waste your season. Learn that each one lends itself to the next. Don't waste your season. Learn that each one has growth to reap. Don't waste your seasons. I refuse to let the 60-year-old me look back at the 20-year-old me like, what was he thinking? Where was the plan? And I refuse to let the kid in me look down at that future grown man. Don't waste your seasons. You have a responsibility as a king, lover, warrior, and friend to look at your time on this stage and its stages and be prepared for every one of them. So don't waste your season.
Seasons. It's been quite a journey. Hard to believe that this is session 6 of this first segment. And I've enjoyed it. The seasons kind of gave you a full spectrum of a man's life. But it spoke to us in different ways. I mean, I'm in my 30s, and you're in your 40s, and you're just old. And so, I mean, you know,
wait a minute,
it's just amazing.
Hey, where were you when you were teaching that friend and lover face? You know, did you not get that?
I just mean you have a lot of wisdom. You've been around a long time.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I still carry a sword, and I'll show you what the warrior looks like if you're not careful. But you know, you are right. I mean, I'm in the fall season of life, the tail end of it. And so that's all about influence. And so I'm trying, you know, to lean into that and figure out how I can leverage that influence. And I don't waste a lot of time. I mean, you know, it's like, man, it's time to be courageous and step up and step into opportunities.
As you were leading us through that, the two big words that jumped out at me were transition and anticipation. Sure. And, you know, how well I anticipate the next season and then how well I transition into the next season is huge in really engaging that season well.
Most definitely.
Yeah. At the core of this session is about living intentionally in every season of life. It kind of reminds me of the great quarterback receiver teams, you know, and those timing plays. I love watching those things because the quarterback anticipates. He knows when the receiver is going to cut, and so he throws the ball. The receiver knows when it's coming. He's expecting it. You know, I don't want to be the guy who gets hit in the back of the helmet with a ball. I want to anticipate what's coming.
Yeah, I've had some seasons where I felt like that guy for sure. Well, guys, we're at the end of a journey. I mean, we've been through these 6 sessions together, and I thought it'd be helpful if we maybe just kind of talked a little bit about, recap them a little bit. And I know you started us and kicked us off.
Right. We started out with saying that manhood is in a state of confusion. And we unpacked how men don't know how to deal with their problems or their pain, their responsibilities, extended adolescence, went back in history and dealt with some of the historical perspective, because that's where we are as men. It's confusing. It's in a state of confusion.
Yeah. Session 1 really did help frame up our problems and how we got to where we are. And then in session 2, we started getting on the solution side, going all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2 and God's original original intent for man, and we looked at how he modeled and mandated the create, cultivate, mandate.
Yeah, then we moved into a clear and compelling definition of authentic manhood. We talked about how we reject passivity and we accept responsibility, lead courageously, and invest eternally.
Yeah, and we kind of then pressed all that into what we call these four faces of manhood, this kind of multi-dimensionality. And I know in the very first one we talked about the king and the warrior, and talked about there in session 4 that the king leads with an integrity and the warrior fights for what matters most.
Right, and then the friend, he pursues meaningful friendships. And then the lover, he in turn, he shares his heart. He's open about his heart. It's those four faces that make up the total authentic man that many of us try to alleviate from, but that's where it's found.
Yeah, and then we finish by looking at the seasons of a man's life and how we need to live intentionally in every season.
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks for taking this run with us. It's been an exciting run, but really it's just the very beginning. Here's where things become real for you, that you kind of step out of spring training and onto the playing field and really kind of press these truths and realities into your life. We've challenged you in each session to write down strategic moves. And now in this final session, we're going to ask you to create your action plan. And right there in your training guide, there's a place for you to kind of take your strategic moves and transfer them over into a one-page deal that is your action plan. And this is your opportunity to press these realities, press these truths into your life and change your life and become a game changer for yourself and all those you influence and all those around you. Now, we've challenged you each session to find at least one other man, if not a couple of men, to become your teammates who can help talk into these things, press into these things, help you process them so that you can apply them in a way that changes everything about who you are as a man. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are a ton of other resources, a ton of other sessions here in this 33 series and at our Authentic Manhood website where you can go and find out things about your relationship with your dad, your relationship with your mom. We press into issues like at home and at work and what it means to be a man in all those arenas. And so we really want to challenge you to continue on in this 33 series with us and continue on this journey into authentic manhood.